Hello, my curious cats, and welcome back to another episode of the Say Psychology podcast, the podcast for all the info on psychology's most questionable history. I'm your host, Leslie Lopez, PhD student and psychology nerd. Okay, guys, I don't know what it is, but I am just so tired lately. Like, I get it. We're all tired, but like this is a different kind of tired. Do you know what I mean? Like I've been burnt out in the past. In fact, I think I was born burnt out, if I'm being honest. But like I said, this is just like different. And I really shouldn't be complaining. Okay, I know. You know, I have a car, I have a job, I have a roof over my head, I have food on the table. I'm a healthy human being. But regardless, I'm still going to complain because I'm pretty good at it. And also, studies have shown that complaining is actually kind of like this form of therapy and good for your mental health. So I'm going to keep complaining. But with that, you know what sounds really, really good right now? A really good deep sleep. With that, if you guys remember from season 3, we went over deep sleep therapy. Well, buckle up because today we're going to learn about the man behind deep sleep therapy. For a little bit of context, I do suggest going back to season 3 and looking over or listening over to the episode on deep sleep therapy just so you're not too lost, because we're going to touch base more on Dr. Harry Bailey's life than actual deep sleep therapy. So, just a suggestion. But if you're a little bit insane in the membrane like me, get cozy tozy and let's jump into it. If you guys can hear my neighbor cutting their lawn, I am so sorry, but there's really nothing I can do about it. Texas summer is here. It is hot. I am sweating under this ring light, my room light, okay? I could turn on the AC, but like I'm trying to save a little bit on electricity because life is also really expensive right now, so just kind of bear with me. All right, so Dr. Harry Bailey was born in New South Wales, Australia in 1922. Honestly, not much is known about his earlier life except for the fact that he grew up more like lower middle class. But one thing's for certain, from a very young and early age, everyone could tell that Harry was a very smart cookie and a very curious cat. So much so that his family decided it would be wise to ship him out to live with his aunt in Sydney, Australia, where he could attend a more prestigious high school, finish his studies there, and go off to college there. And it seemed to work because everyone says that Harry was absolutely thriving in this new city, this new home, in this new school. Like I said, not much is known about his earlier life. In fact, that's really all there is to know about his earlier life, honestly. But at 22, Harry started college and married his first and only wife. Okay, that's important. Remember that. One thing that's always been noted about Harry from the very start is that people always noted that he had this like innate need for people to like him. Like not even a people pleaser, just more like a narcissist. He was a Scorpio, but who am I to judge? Okay, my Aries Mars would beg to differ. So in 1951, Harry had officially set his mind on a career in mental health care and had secured medical training residency at two of Australia's most high-ranking hospitals, Royal Prince Alfred Hospital and Broughton Hall. Luckily for him, Broughton Hall wasn't just any hospital. It was a psychiatric clinic, so you can imagine 28-year-old Harry was just cheesing from ear to ear. Now, let's remember that this is the early 1950s. Okay, so mental health was still a relatively new topic that not many were willing to explore just yet, whether out of fear or out of fear of rejection. Okay, but for risk takers like Harry, they weren't afraid to try out somewhat invasive therapies to explore the unknown. We covered some of these therapies throughout last season, season 3, but just like a little recap. At the time that Harry joined Broughton Hall, doctors were experimenting with the schizophrenic treatment of insulin coma therapy. We actually had a whole episode on insulin coma therapy last season, season 3. So I definitely suggest you go and check out that episode. It's a really good one. But to recap, insulin coma therapy involved injecting patients with an oversupply of insulin, which then induced a coma. Between 1 to several hours later, the patients would be giving a glucose injection to jolt them awake and out of their insulin-induced coma. Now, inducing a coma is undoubtedly an extreme way to go about improving mental health, to say the least. If you guys remember from our insulin coma episode, this treatment was not only stressful to the patient's physical health, but also their mental health. Kind of the exact opposite of what we wanted. It made the patients obese because of the large metabolic shift created with the glucose, especially for those in long-term treatment. And don't even get me started on their mental health. This form of treatment posed a huge risk for permanent brain damage and even death. But I mean, given the limits of psychiatry back then, it makes some sense that this kind of therapy could have been looked at as a viable treatment option. Luckily, this began to change in the 1960s with the introduction of antipsychotics, and this was a welcome shift since the risks certainly outweighed any of these so-called benefits. Harry saw this, and instead of thinking to stop coma therapy, he thought about how to enhance it. Dr. Harry Bailey truly believed that a prolonged coma could alleviate all mental problems. But to be fair, this was kind of textbook for him because, we know now that it doesn't, and it can actually be fatal. But back then, it was seen as an actual potential viable treatment, if you would. Medical textbooks actually stated that mental disorders were the result of physical abnormalities in the brain. So it would make sense that Harry thought it could possibly work. It just needed some slight tweaking. Do you guys see where I'm going with this? I always like to emphasize these points because as a scholar myself, I understand that in the moment we work with what we have, and as a researcher, it's our job to take these current findings and think outside the box to come to a better, safer, more logical conclusion. So, although we know now that something is unethical and wrong, let's always keep in mind that back then it was considered the peak of mental health research. All right, sorry about that little rant / sidetrack there. I get a little defensive when it comes to psychology research. So, despite all the potentially fatal inconsistencies within these practices, Harry felt that with the right technique, he could treat conditions that are still incurable today, such as, say it with me, schizophrenia. Thank you very much. So, we could say that yay for Harry for wanting to find a cure to a serious disorder, but sadly, Harry didn't care about his patients. He only cared about himself. His motivation for finding a cure to schizophrenia was purely selfish and seen as his ticket to fame and notoriety. When Harry saw the innovation that was insulin coma therapy, he believed that the longer the coma, the more effective it would be. Okay? Harry decided that he was going to use a cocktail of sedatives all at once at a high dose and then in short doses in the hours that followed. Sounds simple enough, except Harry was under the supervision of his superlatives because remember, he was just an intern at this point. So he didn't exactly have the authority to conduct these experiments. Do you see where I'm going with this? Okay, as a PhD student, I kind of get his pain in a way because feasibility is everything. So Harry did what any good student would, and he networked his way around. The power of networking, I am telling you. Honestly, respect to the hustle, okay? I can't even be mad at that. In fact, he was so good at it that just 2 years into his internship, he was appointed Assistant Clinical Director of the Division of Mental Hygiene of the New South Wales Department of Health. Okay, yes, that is a mouthful, but also dang, because this man was still in school and he now held a position of authority in the same hospital that he was completing his studies at. Again, respect the hustle. I can't even be mad. He was responsible for an entire assembly of public workers overseeing clinical treatment protocol, organizing medical conferences, etc. This man was at the top. Again, for the third time, respect the hustle because I can't even be mad. Like, also the people who put him there, like, what were y'all thinking? So Harry graduated at just 31 with a degree in psychiatric medicine. After graduating, he continued doing what he did best, and that's networking. He ended up befriending a Dr. Ian Fraser, who at the time served as the New South Wales Chief Medical Officer for Mental Health. With his help and friendship, Harry went on to straight up just lie about his research in order to get what he wanted. Harry told Fraser he needed to travel across the world in search of new techniques. He sent his proposal to the World Health Organization along with an impressive resume and a long list of references. Like, it must have been extremely impressive because they accepted his application and granted him the money needed for him and his wife to travel across the world in search of new psychological developments. Like, how did he do it? Honestly, tell me your secret. This was huge because all over Australian media, he was being recognized as Australia's first ever traveling doctor. He was finally getting the fame and recognition he so desperately craved for. While traveling, he discovered the beginnings of electroconvulsive therapy, the use of psychedelics, and many other treatments. He learned a lot, but he was a stubborn man who truly believed that the optimal solution was still a long-term sedation. It was almost like he was looking for confirmation to his theory and not so much traveling to actually learn. You know what I mean? The man was obsessed with being number one, that's for sure. So much so that when he returned to Australia 2 years later, he was viewed as a hero in the field of psychiatry. Harry saw this newfound fame and decided it was exactly what he needed to finally conduct the brain experiments he'd waited so long for. Since Harry's idea was that the longer the coma, the better, he called this deep sleep therapy. With the help of his fame and his friend Dr. Ian Fraser, he was able to go back to Broughton Hall and open his own unit where he could begin to perform these experiments. He called this unit the Cerebral Surgery Research Unit, or CSRU for short. As the unit grew, so did Harry's ego. He saw himself as the new hero of schizophrenia, and the media was eating it all up, which only further grew his ego. Like, that's the last thing this man needs. It got to the point where Harry began making some of the most absurd claims with no research, absolutely no research to back it up, which today would be illegal, by the way. But like, he would go on to claim that schizophrenia was the largest problem facing the general public. So much so that the condition killed 2 out of every 3 teenagers in Australia. This is so absurd, okay? Because like, I want to laugh so bad, but it's also so sad. I want to yell so bad, you know what I mean? Especially since the reality at the time was that schizophrenia was only prominent in less than 1% of the world's population. But Harry refused to be wrong despite actual medical evidence. Sadly, the public and many medical professionals as well took his word for it. Like, that's shocking. Like, you're a medical professional. This is your expertise. What are you doing, right? But Harry and a team of scientists, doctors, and psychiatrists quickly got to work altering traditional electroconvulsive therapy to newer methods that better aligned with Harry's form of thinking. Now, if you haven't caught on by now, Harry enjoyed the frequent little white lie. He often boasted to the press and The Who about all these amazing advancements that he was creating and how he is the revolutionary that the medical field had been searching for so long. But in reality, by 1959, Harry's personal government-ran hospital unit wasn't doing too hot. Shocker. The hospital had a total of 57 beds and about 50 staff. However, those same staff always claimed that the hospital unit was never even close to full capacity. Not once. Despite how impressive Harry's techniques that he supposedly learned abroad and in all his years of medical studies and experience, He averaged about one operation a month. I would have so much secondhand embarrassment working for him, but like, I just work there. I'd just be like, I don't know, dude, I just work here. Like, but on the bright side, the employees were getting paid without much effort on their part. Okay, so over the next couple of years, Harry began to get a bit of a side eye from his fans. Okay, this especially took place after he took up the position of a hospital superintendent at a neighboring asylum. He walked in being the stuck-up guy he naturally is, at trying to change things. Now, to be fair, the hospital needed a change desperately. It was overpacked. Like, the hospital had enough room for maybe like 500 patients. It was at over 1,700 in capacity, okay? It was overpacked. It was unsanitary. Practically one giant standing OSHA violation. Now, if there's one thing an employee hates, it's getting a new boss thinking they can come in and change things when everyone else is completely fine and comfortable with how things are currently running. Harry lasted like not even a year before he was practically kicked out. He would report his employees to like the Australian version of the health department, and he would reach out to HR and all these people above him, but like, honestly, like, no one cared. Like, I mean, I gotta give credit where credit is due. Harry wanted to improve the place, and the government was basically like, haha, we are not going to spend precious tax dollars on the mentally insane. Are you insane? Sadly, after Harry was fired, he actually went back to his old ways of lying and having main character energy. Love that. Not long after he was fired, he opened his own practice, but it wasn't the exact notoriety he was used to when working for the big guys. When he started off, he had no staff, and he was used to telling people what to do while he kind of just like watched in the background. But now he was the one who would have to physically be caring for the patients. So although he was now able to take full control of his treatments and the patients he decided to see, he had no one to boss around. So for Harry, this wasn't exactly a win-win situation. The biggest downside to having his own practice was that he wasn't able to conduct the major brain surgeries and controversial therapies he'd spent so long building due to a lack of staff, which to Harry were like the main things to making him famous, right? Harry was able to scrape by for a couple of years until he eventually swallowed his pride and contacted an old doctor friend who he knew had similar controversial views. Together, over the next couple of years, they brought deep sleep therapy to the world of mental care. There is a whole episode, okay, like I said earlier, on deep sleep therapy in season 3. Again, I highly suggest you check it out. But in a nutshell, deep sleep therapy involves heavily sedating the mentally ill patients for long periods of time with the intention of resetting the brain, kind of like an on and off switch. Harry described this procedure as, just as a good sleep enables the body to wake up refreshed, so does a good sleep will enable the brain to wake up refreshed. Harry believed in his treatment so much because, of course, he decided he needed not just his own practice, but his own hospital with beds and nurses. All private, of course. He couldn't be bothered to deal with government-ran institutions given his past experience. I don't blame him. So, with the help of a fellow nurse friend named Betty Shea, he searched for months until he found Chelmsford Private Hospital. Now, Chelmsford was a small hospital consisting of just 15 beds, and they were desperate to stay afloat, meaning they welcomed Harry and his controversial treatment options so long as he could get the beds filled. In 1963, just after his 40th birthday, Harry was officially open and ready to take in mentally ill patients at Chelmsford Private Hospital. Harry, the narcissist that he is, appointed himself as chief psychiatrist and director of the deep sleep therapy ward. Let's welcome Dr. Harry's first patient, 17-year-old Julie Myers. Julie was suffering from a very common form of mental illness that, sadly, I myself also suffer from once a month. This mental illness is called PMS. Yes. 17-year-old Julie Myers was put under deep sleep therapy because she suffered from PMS. The way there's absolutely no excuse other than that the world hates women for this, because this was in 1963, not the 1800s, not the early 1900s, like not even the mid 1900s. Let's be real here. Okay. Oh, and fun fact, Julie's father was the one who brought her to see Dr. Harry Bailey. Even more reason to hate men. Fucking eye roll, okay? Like, poor Julie, most likely she just suffered from PMDD and was hanging on for dear life. Okay, like maybe TMI, but I have PMDD and it's really nothing to joke about or take lightly because it is so hard and so dark. I don't want to get too into it too much, but being on the verge of unaliving yourself every month isn't exactly a walk in the park. Okay, like it's not an easy thing. It's hard, and I can't imagine what poor Julie was going through. But anyways, Julie was administered both electroconvulsive therapy and deep sleep therapy throughout her stay at Chelmsford. She was eventually released from the hospital after her treatments, but things only got worse. Shocker. Her parents brought her back to Chelmsford, where Harry continued the treatments alongside counseling from Dr. Harry Bailey himself. Oddly enough, these one-on-one counseling sessions only took place at Julie's home when her parents weren't there. In the end, Julie took her own life. Now, I'm not one to speculate or point fingers, but I think we can all put the puzzle pieces together. Now, mind you, this was Harry's first patient, but it meant nothing to Harry that Julie was no longer with us because he just kept chugging along as director of psychiatry at Chelmsford. DST was extremely dangerous, to say the least, and the more patients that entered the ward, the more dangerous the complications emerged. Like, first of all, the whole place stank. DST was known to cause bladder infections due to the patients being in a physically induced coma for days, and they were often left to lay in their own urine and sometimes feces. In just the first year, 6 of his patients had died of DST treatment at Chelmsford. Despite him being a terrible human, the man was smart, okay? Like, there's absolutely no way he hadn't caught on to the plight of the situation. Did he care though? No, not really. Because he just kept going on and he was more concerned with carrying out his treatments than taking accountability for the literal death of his patients under his treatments. I don't know if you caught on to that right quick, but yes, Harry refused to take accountability for his patients' deaths. In 1966, he found one of his head nurses writing a cause of death report for one of the patients that had recently passed. First, he yelled at her. Second, he ripped the report into a bunch of little pieces. And finally, he wrote his own report stating that the patient had died from natural causes in no way related to the treatment they were receiving. Harry truly gaslit himself into thinking that he was the evolution of mental health, so much so that in 1971, he decided it was time to expand. He bought a little cottage-like home that he named the Mandela Home, in which he claimed he would use as a second Chelmsford branch. However, one thing I briefly mentioned at the beginning of the episode, which I'm hoping you caught on and remembered, was that Harry was married to his first and only wife. He, of course, wasn't spending too much time at home, and he, of course, blamed it on his work. Do we see where I'm going with this? Harry obviously had no morals, so he saw it perfectly fit to have an affair with his head nurse. But that's not all. And that's not the worst part. Not only was he cheating on his wife with his head nurse, but he was also known to make sexual advances on his female patients. This is how I know sexuality isn't a choice, because in what universe does it make sense that I hate men and I love women, but I'm only attracted to men? Like, make it make sense. Speaking of how much I love women, in 1972, at the ripe age of 49, Harry found himself cheating on his wife with someone new. Not surprised. Her name was Sharon, and she was court-ordered into psychiatric help that she didn't need, by the way, after being involved in a tragic accident. The court, for some reason, saw Harry as fit for this court order. I'm pretty sure it's just because she's a woman, let's be honest. 2 years after first starting counseling with Harry, the woman became obsessed with him. She threatened anyone, including nurses and other patients who she perceived were getting too close to him. It wasn't obvious at the time, well, as it would be now, but Harry was SAing her. She ended up pregnant, to which Harry forced her to abort. Sharon did, but this only sent her over the edge even more. Harry, on the other hand, claimed to want to get rid of her, but for some reason he just didn't. He wouldn't. She stayed as a patient at Chelmsford, and she and Harry continued their affair. In 1978, Sharon was found dead in her apartment, which Harry paid for, by the way, from an overdose of Tuinol. Not surprisingly, Tuinol was one of Harry's primary treatment drugs at Chelmsford. 2 investigations later, and Dr. Harry Bailey was off the hook. Sharon's death was ruled a self-ingested overdose. I'll say it once, and I'll say it over and over and over again. No woman is born insane. She is driven to insanity by men. Maybe not all men, but it's always a man. Sharon's death, although driven by Harry, you can't change my mind, had quite an impact on Harry's life. He became depressed, withdrawn, and nothing like his narcissistic self. One of his little doctor friends suggested Harry himself go through deep sleep therapy. And he did. In 1978, his friends drugged him and admitted him into Chelmsford under an alias. Makes you think, like, did they actually want the best for him, or did they know what was going on and they were like, no, we need to do something about this man, and this is the time. Over several weeks, he underwent electroconvulsive therapy and deep sleep therapy just like his patients. Needless to say, it was pure hell, as he deserved. While Harry underwent the hell of his own treatment, his past employees took this time to finally report him. And this is what I mean. Something tells me this was planned, and they were like, yo, this is the time. It's now or never. In 1979, he was finally forced to hand over his medical license, and in 1983, he was charged for manslaughter for the death of a past patient whose family had under investigation for years. Sadly, though, he was dismissed because the judge didn't think there was enough evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. But the public wasn't having it. Harry's name was no longer linked with revolutionary medical marvel. His marriage ended, he turned to alcohol, and in 1985, he unalived himself with pills. And in 1988, deep sleep therapy was officially banned. Well, my curious cats, thank you so much for coming along this interesting ride this week. Dr. Harry Bailey was quite the character who, to his last day, never took accountability for any of his wrongdoings. If you enjoyed today's episode, please remember to follow, subscribe, and share. The support means everything. As always, citations will be in the description if you want to check those out. Stay blessed, stay safe, and stay psyched. I love you. Bye.